when you're competing on a feed where someone's thumb is like this, like a trigger, you're not competing with other podcasts. You're competing with every form of content in the world. The second you lose their interest, like the split second, they're gone. Now I'm at a point to make a great 30-second clip. It's 15 to 20 hours.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Surf. And this is the podcast where we teach you how to grow on social media by talking to people who have actually done it. People like Julian Dorey, who hosts the popular podcast Trendifier, which is one of the few podcasts that is in my consistent rotation. There are not many shows I download every single week, but Trendifier is one of them. And I'm very excited to have Julian here on the podcast today. Welcome to the show.
Jacob, thanks for having me, man. Much appreciated.
I'm excited to have you here. And where I want to start today, I want to kind of learn a little bit about Julian pre-Trendifier, because I like to do a little bit of homework before. I wasn't finding a ton. I found a few things, co-founded a couple companies, latest data, Sporantics. But give me a little bit of a background on you pre-podcast.
Yeah, so I'll correct the record a little bit there right away. Those are technically companies, but as I always say, they were side hustle LLCs. They weren't. Latest data could have been something, never really got there. And then Sporantics was basically media work and a little bit of consulting that my friends and I did. But my full-time job, where I made whatever little money I did, was as a private banker. So I worked at Merrill Lynch in the private bank there. They were owned by Bank of America. I worked with a pretty awesome 7-person team. We managed billions of dollars. It was a lot of money. And we worked with a lot of ultra high net worth individuals. That's like the industry term for it. So that would be people like, our book was average net worth, maybe like 70, 80 million, something like that. But we'd work with them. And then we'd also work with companies. So that could be big private companies managing everything, basically being like their outside CFO, or it could also be public companies and dealing with things like 10b5-1 plans or something pretty simple like a 401k plan. That's very straightforward. So we did a lot. I just didn't I loved my team. I loved the guy I worked for. That all was great. I just didn't like the industry at all. Banking is a very, very regulated place, which some of that I obviously understand. I think whenever you have things go very bad over time, and there's been several different times where that's happened, you get over-regulation and it gets insane. And we definitely, before I ever got into the industry, crossed the point of insane after the 08-09 crisis, because what happened was they basically regulated everyone. They didn't regulate the people making derivatives and all that bullshit that they made and crashed the world, which was a small group of bankers. They regulated the entire system, which ends up really hurting the customer. So it's another example of you kind of have to try to go 50 miles an hour instead of 100 or 0. We were 0 before the crisis. That's a horrible idea. That's why that happened. But, they went 100. That basically took away any fun. So pretty much I had to ask permission to get toilet paper when I took a shit. So I was like, okay, that is not what's working. So shortly before the pandemic, late summer, later stages of 2019, my boss gave me the offer. So in the business I was in, it's pretty much like you come out of college, you work your balls off for 4 or 5 years. And then if you do a good job, you get the offer. So I got there. I worked hard to get there. And then when I did, I was like, holy shit, I can't do this. Because if I took it, it'd be the first time I ever actually made money and didn't live paycheck to paycheck, which would have been great. But my boss, like I said, I was very close with him. So even though I could take it and bail whenever I wanted to, technically, I would never do that. I'm like, if I take this, I'm going to commit to this for 5 years, right? Minimum. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And so that was a tough convo. But I was like, listen, I think I got to go after some of this other stuff I'm interested in. Being on those LLCs we mentioned out front and some of the work I did there were just a lot of things in the more creative marketing spaces that interested me. So I was like, okay, let me try to make an industry shift. And he was like, cool. While you're doing that, just stay here and, make your money to pay your bills, and I'll help you however you want, which was pretty awesome. So I was in the midst of making that move and, working with every recruiter, working on all different types of jobs when the pandemic hit. And about a little over a month before the pandemic hit, I went to do a little bit of media work for my friend Ty in late January 2020, and it involved like some on-camera stuff. And so at the end of it, a bunch of people, maybe like 30 people, were coming up to me like, bro, do you have a podcast? And I'm looking at them like, what the fuck am I going to do with a podcast? No, I don't have a podcast. And they're like, you need a podcast. I'm like, oh, who the fuck is going to listen to me on a podcast, right? And then, I don't know, like that night, I was driving back, and I think I was trying to figure out all these jobs and everything. It was a weird time, and I was just like, no plan. I was just like, fuck it. All right, I'll make it a little side hobby. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I'll just start like working on like how to build a studio or whatever. Because if I ever did it, I'll do it right, I guess. And so that became like the late night / Saturday afternoon project for the next 4 or 5 weeks and some Sundays. And I ordered all the equipment, or most of it, on maybe like March 4th or March 5th, something like that, 2020. And so that week, the first day of quarantine ended up being March 13th. And that like week leading up to it was insane. Because again, I was working in the markets, right? So everything's going straight down the toilet and clients are flipping out. And so I forget that I ordered everything. And so then that very first day, that Friday the 13th, I get the notification from Amazon that the shit's downstairs. And I pick it up, I bring it upstairs, I'm looking at it, and I had forgotten I ordered it. And I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do with this? Because now all my jobs that I've been working on, everything dried up like right away. My life is in shambles. And then I was just like, well, shit, I guess this is what I got to do, huh? And that was really it. So I just started building. I spent probably, I launched September 15, 2020. So I started building for about 6 months and just working like crazy. Didn't talk about it. Didn't tell anyone. A couple of people who visited and like came through and knew about it, but that was it. And then I launched, and here we are.
Just for the audience's context, when you say you ordered gear, we're not talking like a couple mics and a computer. Like, from my understanding, you went all out with your gear from day one. And talk to me about why that was so important for you.
There's a couple things here that are important to say. But first of all, really depends on where you're at and what you're looking at trying to do. That's critical. For me, I've never had money. Like, my bank account, I'm always looking at. I've never fallen below zero. Never got myself into debt or anything, but it's always like, man, we're really hanging on by a string. So what was interesting was that maybe like 6 months ahead of the pandemic was the first time where once I pulled back from the job, all the spending I would normally do on the job in the context of business, right, which is just a normal thing. It's not the kind of stuff you just put through to expense. It's weird how it worked. I didn't do, because I wasn't going to be doing that. And so I focused maybe on setting aside like just a little bit here and there and getting a couple investments in there that did okay. And so I scraped enough around to have a little bit of runway. And I was like, all right, if you're going to start a podcast and you want it to be your thing, and it's interesting that I say it like this, because like I told you, when I was doing it, that wasn't the thought. But I think like maybe the back of my mind was telling me that might be it, and I just didn't realize it. That's probably what it was. But if you're going to start a podcast and you want it to be your thing, meaning it's not just something that complements what you do or complements your business, something like that, you have to do everything that's in your control to 1,000%. So I'm like, all right, who are the 10 best podcasts in the world? And there's a list of them. And like, obviously you start with like Rogan, and you're like, okay, how's his studio look? I'm like, it's pretty fucking good. So I went on and part of learning all the equipment was studying all the equipment all these different podcasters had. And I tied together that a lot of them had some of the same things that like Rogan had. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to buy one model better than everything that they got. So I did that and I started to build a studio. And then once, like when that equipment got there, and I'd ordered most of it, that's when I really started to be like, oh, this is going to turn into the thing. And so then building the actual studio and the space became like a whoa. All right, it's not just, it needs to pop on camera or something. It's like, this needs to be something that I'm proud to work in every day. Like, this is going to be my office. I mean, it's true. I haven't seen the sunlight in 2 years. So this is where I spend my time. So you better be going in there and feeling good. So I was like, I definitely went all out. I did do it. I mean, I didn't spend 30, 40 grand. I was able to do this for everything and this does include a couple things I owned previously. So like a MacBook, some TVs and stuff, but I did everything for like, I think it was like 12,000, something like that. So it was an investment, but it wasn't wrecking me, So I guess to go back to the original point, it was like, you kind of got to go for gold on the controllable stuff because there's so many podcasts out there. I mean, there's like fucking 4 million podcasts in this country. How do you immediately, when someone decides to give your podcast a shot, you have 10 seconds for them to not be like, fuck this. Right. And then you have another 30 seconds for them to be like, all right, is this the worst thing I've ever heard or not? And then you have another 5 minutes for them to be like, am I ever going to visit this page again? And then you have another 10 minutes for them to be like, am I going to listen to this once in a while? So like, to get to each of those steps, you can't let them off the hook. And so the quality is like the first thing there. So that's definitely like for people that are starting it up, maybe you don't want to go all out because it's not like, you don't know if it's going to be your thing or whatever. And again, like, people have different situations. Like, someone that's doing great in business, I don't know why the fuck you'd start a podcast, but like, if you're you don't need to do it like this. But if there's a few things, I would definitely say, probably don't fuck around with the mic. Get a great mic. I would invest in a mixer too. I do my mixing off the computer, and the only thing I adjust on the computer is a little bit of volume here and there. And they're actually pretty reasonable. The mixers of all the things you would expect to be expensive, it's the least expensive of them. And then start there and figure out over time, like as you keep going along, it gets more serious, start to add.
So beyond gear, because you said when you bought your gear, you looked at what other the top podcasters were using and you went kind of the one level up. I have a quote here of yours.
I said that as halfway a joke, but yes, like in general, you can't go up over a Shure SM7B, right? But like the mixer, you could, that kind of thing.
So I have this quote here of yours, and it says, if you're crazy enough to enter a space where there are individual shows with hundreds of millions of listeners, everything within your control that you can be better at from day one on, you should take within your control. So beyond gear, what are some of those other things you identified that you could be better than some of these top shows at?
Gear's really the only thing that I can think of that's completely in your control. Not just gear, but like the studio itself and the look, the production quality, like the things that go off the gear, right? So I was like, well, a lot of these shows, for example, they shoot live. I'm not able to do that because I don't have a producer. So I said, well, that's more work, but I can make the camera edits better, right? Because I can be exact. And so I'm exact. There's a certain, it's like a little bit of art with it when I edit every week. I had to find my way into marketing content, so to speak, and figure out where that sweet spot was going to be. But I was always struck by how great the YouTube marketing content was for podcasts, right? So think like mid-form clips, things like that, 3 to 11 minute clips. So many podcasts that do an amazing job. I mean, you can name a million of them. I was always struck by how great that is and how consistent they were. But over time, maybe over the first 6 months of the podcast, I started to realize that this space has a massive blind spot with short content, like the TikTok type content. I'm like, there's plenty of podcasts who are posting on TikTok per se, a lot less than you'd expect. Like relative to other industries or other forms of content, nothing, right? Like so few of them were. But the effort on there was abhorrent. It was really bad. I'm like, they're just like when you're competing on a feed where someone's thumb is like this, like a trigger, and you're not competing with other podcasts. You're competing with every form of content in the world, and it's not something that they clicked. It's given to them in a feed. The second you lose their interest, like the split second, they're gone. Right. So I'd see all these podcasts, like including some of the best in the world, and they would just lift like a 40-second clip, like boop, like that, like no editing or very little editing, no adjustment, no figuring it out. And I'm like, some of these guys are getting millions of views sometimes. A lot of them weren't doing nearly as well. Like if I had the attention some of these shows did and I had their following on TikTok, I'd be like, what the fuck are we doing wrong? But I'm like, okay. And it didn't happen overnight. I really had to learn. I mean, I certainly didn't figure it out in a day. I'm still figuring out stuff every day. But over time, I was like, oh, you can get artistic with this. If I can just keep people from hitting their thumb like that and give them something where it's like, well, that was different. That's enough. Because like how much, especially in like talking content, you're limited in especially 30-second content, which was critical for TikTok, but even 60-second content, you're limited in how much information and how much complete satisfaction they can get from a clip. That's just how it is. Like, and you're using pre-existing things. You're not using scripted stuff that you can like set it up perfectly. It's like you have to go use what you used, including tones and flows and shit like that. So I was like, I have to give them something that makes them go, that was really cool. I want more. And that's really what I tried to do. And that was my bread and butter. So I built through TikTok. And I would say, like, when you talk about finding things that other people don't do, that's still an unbelievable opportunity. I still don't see many people at all trying to do it. Not like how I do it, but just like putting effort into it. There's a lot of different ways to do it. God knows. Like I figured out one way. There's a million ways. But, I think that's definitely something I'd spend time on. But it is time. I mean, like putting all my chips in this basket, that was the only way to do it. Because like now I'm at a point to make a great 30-second clip. It's 15 to 20 hours. I mean, that's just how it is. I'm working on one right now. We'll see if I get it out today. But, TikTok did teach me how to be very exact about stuff because, I couldn't my whole audience was Apple and Spotify for a long time. Like YouTube was the one thing, no matter what I did, just couldn't build an audience, and I would get people through TikTok. They'd sub to YouTube and then they'd go to Apple, Spotify, which was great. I love that. Fine. I want you to go wherever you want to go. But I'm always like, I was thinking to myself, before the pandemic, there was 30% of people got their podcasts on YouTube. So it's probably even more now. It's probably like 50. And I'm like, I got to find that audience. And so when YouTube launched Shorts, I would take my TikTok content that I already knew, for example, because I already put it out there, was good or not good. And I put it out on YouTube and my numbers, my data would be better, but not the views and not the engagement or discoverability. And it was frustrating for a while. And then finally, at the beginning of December, they started taking them. And then once they started going, now they take like pretty much everything I send, and the YouTube Shorts feed much more likely to have a majority of people who want to watch podcast content versus TikTok, where you can run it. It doesn't matter how great your hashtags are, which I was very exact with. You can run into people where it's like, nah, I'm not into that. And on TikTok, if you touch that bar, meaning if you go above 29.8 seconds and you have a bar at the bottom, like that progress bar, no go. And on YouTube, that's not quite the case. So I still try to get as many below 30-second clips as I can. But now on YouTube, like there's content that I could have never made on TikTok because it was a waste of my time, total waste of my time, that now I can make on YouTube, and they'll do millions on YouTube. And I'll put it on TikTok, and it'll do like 50 grand or something like that. So, TikTok did teach me to be more exact. And now I'm still using all the same things, but with a little more leeway and also subject matter leeway too on YouTube. And that's kind of where I found a differentiator. So sorry, that was a long rambling answer, but that's pretty much how it all happened so far.
And to your point with YouTube, people are more inclined to watch a podcast. It's also easier, right? Like they can just click your profile and all your podcasts are right there. And I kind of want
They don't have to leave the app.
Exactly. But I kind of want to dig into that 15 to 20 hours that you're spending. I'm curious how you even identify a clip, because if we're talking 29.8 seconds or shorter, we'll just stick with TikTok for a minute. Your shows are 3 hour plus on average. So how do you comb through over 180 minutes to find 30 seconds?
I'll show you. Every episode I do, as I'm editing it, this is the one thing I do by hand because there'd be too many screens to do it on the computer. But like every episode, I put the timestamps, which are an abbreviated version of this, and I mark up every single thing that happens throughout the app. This is actually like a lighter one, so this is only like this one. I didn't go into as deep a details. So this was like 5 pages,
and that's one episode.
I'll put that's one episode right there. Some of them, like a detailed one, could be 12 pages, 13 pages. And anytime I see something, it's always more than I need. Like I definitely do. I wish I could be more on my end, have better brevity with it. That's just not my nature. I'm a little OCD, but I mark off these different spots. And so then I do have a little bit of a photographic memory for sure. So I can kind of pick off, like I can pull out where things were on episode 35, right? Like someone could be like, oh, you and John Rondi were talking about Bezos and Amazon and the conundrum about monopolies. And I'll be like, that was roughly somewhere between 27 and 35 minutes in, so that definitely helps. But just because I have that information doesn't make it any easier to decide. And the reason I say that is because it's like almost having a kid every time I do one of these now. Because I know before I do it, I'm gonna be married to whatever this clip is for a while. So there are some days where I'm looking and I start to I do the first part where I'm editing down the clip just to like get to where the body is. And I'm like, nah, I don't fuck with it. Like it's not, my attitude is if I can't get people staying on this clip for most of it, where my watch time is great, therefore then get, above 1 million views on YouTube, it is not worth my time, period. So a couple weeks ago, I do have to experiment once in a while. I did experiment with 2 types of content because I had to. I made the choice. And I'm like, this probably isn't going to work, but I have to know this type of clip doesn't work. So I did. They have, see on YouTube, they do have 400,000 and 215,000 views. So it's not like it was nothing, but it didn't move the needle a lot, And so when I look at that, I'm like, well, one of them was a little shorter. So it took a little less time. That was 20 seconds. But I'm like, that was roughly 20, 25 hours of time for those 2. It's a lot of time in your week. I'm trying to eat here, right? So it's harder to experiment. So yeah, I guess like the answer is it's difficult to know exactly what ones you're going to use, because then you can also have perfect clips to tell a great story, but it doesn't elicit. It's one that just doesn't elicit a ton of opinions or comments on it. Like people just like it and they're like, oh, cool. Oh, I really like that. And it won't go as far because of that. So then I'll be like on some of those, like I've had some that I feel like nothing I ever put out I think is perfect after, because I always find something, but it feels like really fucking good. And then I'll put it out and I'm like, it was a middler, It came together beautifully. It was like a production, but it just didn't. There's a lot of different little things that go into it. And I'd be lying if I told you I can identify all of them. I can't. It's all floating around in here, but I also will like forget things because I'm thinking about the one thing in this clip and then I'm not thinking about the other. There's so many moving pieces. So there's not, it is a huge balance of art and science. And the science is always changing too.
And I know you can't necessarily identify all of those things, or sometimes there's things you forget. Putting you on the spot a little bit here, but you don't have to give away all your secrets either. But what are some of those things that you try to remember to include? Or even better yet, when you have the body of a clip there, what makes you go yes or no? Like, what are those little identifiers that you're looking for that you think this one has potential, move it to the next stage, or this one doesn't, scrap it?
It must have visuals, the ability to have visuals that I can coordinate. So for people that haven't seen my content on the short form side, which is probably pretty much everyone listening, there is, the way I do it is I make a clip that has no lag time in it, first of all. Like it's syllable to syllable, but it's not, I'm very anal about, I don't want it to be, when people cut things together and the words flip on top of each other so you can tell it was like split. I don't want you to know that. So I make it spread out right on the syllable so it flows. And then I'll also zoom around and change from camera to camera so that people can't really see, like if it was, there was a 10-second gap where someone was given an aside that wasn't necessary or something like that. And then I'll put music behind it, which I enjoy a lot. It's a bitch because I gotta fit, like I'm very anal with the music. It needs to be, I get to use the best music ever created, right? So I love all different kinds of music. So I'll sit there listening to fucking songs and playing with stuff for hours. But then you also have to master the volume on the mic end, because then, I might have talked back here on one syllable. I might have talked here on another. The guest might be more at this volume. I might be more at this volume, or vice versa. So that's kind of a bar by bar thing. That's a little bit of a process. But the main thing when I say visuals out front is that I use split screen videos. So you will see them cut in between where it'll be a quick shot of like the full body of the guest or me, whoever's talking. But then as we're saying things, it will cut to half screen of whoever's talking and the other half of the screen being a visual that coordinates with what they're saying. So if I have someone telling a story, a personal story, on those, I really try to find like some type of character arc from some movie or some show somewhere that vaguely describes what they're saying. That can be hard sometimes. I did some clips that did really well on all the platforms with my guy Luisa, who's hilarious. And I couldn't, for him and what he was describing, that one took a while because I couldn't find, he's a 6'6", 315-pound ex-pro boxer Italian dude. I couldn't find like a great movie that had a lead man featured like that. So I ended up having to use Leonardo DiCaprio and using more close-up stuff, and that was fine. But like I wanted to keep, that was a 3-part series for that one. So I wanted to keep it consistent and for 3 different clips be able to find all these moments where he's describing something. Like when he's like, so I go up to customs to hand in my passport. I want to get a guy, this is how I landed on Leo. I need to get a guy in a movie going up to customs with a passport. And better yet, I also want a close-up shot in there of the passport where he's handing it to the guy. So when I found Leo had a clip from Inception where he did that, I'm like, well, there we go. There's our winner, and they don't look that much alike, but I guess they're both white guys. Like that's the bare minimum right there. So that's just what we went with. But I try to match that up. And when there's plenty of clips where it's not quote unquote a personal story. It might be a more historical thing. I'll use imagery that helps explain it. Like I just did one where I was talking about after the Holocaust, when Eisenhower and the Americans found the camps. Eisenhower, actually, a little side note, just a little history note, genius move by him. He recognized, he was horrified, obviously, but he recognized right away that if I just tell people about this shit, they're not going to believe me. And so he said, painful as this is, and there were other generals who did this too at other camps, but he was like, I need all our guys who have cameras to get those fucking things rolling. And I want you that he realized at the camp, I forget which camp he was at, but he realized like his guys showed him a map and there's a village literally right next to the camp. And he's like, there's no way these people could not smell this. Like the death and everything. And he's like, you get them down here and they're gonna watch, they're gonna see what this was. And you're gonna have cameras rolling when they do it. So they did that. And the people, of course, were horrified and all that. And so I talked about that clip. And like in that one, the opener of it, I used a lot of cuts from movies to set the scene where I'm like, he went and collected all these people from the local villages and made them walk the 2 miles to the camp. And then they saw the carnage that was around them. And I used different cuts from movies that showed different things that are at least like not X-rated of Holocaust type stuff. And I used some cuts of like some drone footage of Auschwitz and the pathway, the railroad tracks and all that. And then the opening to the camp where it says that thing in German that everyone would recognize. And so once that maybe like opening 9 seconds was done and I had all the cuts for the rest of it, I went and found the colorized HD quote unquote footage of that actual footage of the people visiting the camps. And so when I was describing it, you see, I'm talking about the faces, and we were actually watching a cut of it in the studio when we were on camera doing that. I'm talking about the faces, and then you see like the faces of these people. I'm cutting to different people having different emotions, and then I'm like, I said something along the lines of, they ignored this shit, and I show, the ovens and the unspeakable stuff. And so when I had that clip, I think it was like 28 seconds long or something. Of course, I'm like, there's visual city right here. It's just a matter of what is also like not going to make you throw up. I don't want to put anything on there that needs like a label on it. So that was an obvious one, but that's when I'm looking at these things, that's kind of how it is. I had another World War II story recently where someone was explaining Operation Mincemeat, which is where the British MI6 used a dead guy's body and put fake plans in it and put him in a general's uniform and washed him up on the shores of Spain to do a disinformation campaign against the Nazis. Like I was immediately thinking, all right, I want some Inglourious Basterds clips in here, right? Immediately. And then I'm like, well, she describes a dead guy a lot, and I can't use like a real dead guy because that's too graphic, but I'm like, fuck, how am I going to, and then I'm like, holy shit. There's a movie coming out about this thing, just happened to be this year. So there was a trailer for it. And I was like, it's got Colin Firth in it. I'm like, here we go. So like that one kind of came together. Other ones, I'll use cuts from, I did one about iPhones being hacked, and I just use all kinds of cuts from like videos of people talking about iPhones and, the B-roll of them using it. And then when he was talking about, in the clip, my guest was talking about, like the software that they use, I used like it was Pegasus. So I went and found videos on Pegasus and then used different visuals and graphics they did. So it's like, it's a lot of creativity, but that move, and it moves, boom, 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 boom. When you're seeing that, you're like, I'm almost like, whoa, oh, that too. Oh, that, like if I'm watching it, like I'm looking around like, oh my God, that too. I want to keep them moving, but also give them a taste of like culture outside of just my guest talking or me talking.
So where are you finding with these movie clips? Is that you just kind of sitting down on Netflix and scrubbing through different movies, trying to find the right moments? Like, what does that look like?
I just scrub through the internet. I don't even know how to, can you rip something? Isn't that illegal? Rip something off Netflix? I don't know, but I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before. I use anything publicly available on the internet.
First, when you were describing the Holocaust video, you were talking about all the footage you had to find, and you totally got me when you said, and that was the first 9 seconds. And I thought you described the whole video just with the amount of like, to put into context, like how much work this takes you. So out of that 15 to 20 hours, what takes the longest? Is it finding the music? Is it finding the right clips? Like, where is most of your time spent on that?
The thing where music gets tough is when I can't find the song. That's rough. The music sometimes falls right because I have a good feel for that at this point. I've been doing music on videos since the beginning, so like I learned that well. But goddamn, when I can't find a song, I mean, I have a list that I keep. I like all different genres, and I'm very exact about it. But sometimes that can be that could take a day. Other times, some of my best videos ever, it took 10 minutes getting the right song. Or like the first one landed. That's the best feeling in the world. It's probably 2 out of 3 videos. It's not too long. And then the third video, it's like, fuck, I've been sitting here for 4 hours trying to find a song, 6 hours. Because then it's like you have to be so exact with the songs. You can have a beat that raises at the wrong time. You can have, there's so much, you can have something where the tone changes in the voice at the wrong time when the beat goes up, and then now it doesn't work. I don't know if some of that really matters, but to me it does. So I'm never going to get over that. But that part can be quicker. Going and finding the clip, I'm more exact with what things work now than I was, so I'm more likely to find something quicker, but sometimes that can be a few hour process. If I started with, oh yeah, I remember when we talked about that, and then when I go to start edit whatever that was, I'm like, oh, but our tone was off, or like, oh shit, I don't remember that's gonna be hard to make to this length. So that can get difficult. Once I have it and I know like, oh, this is the spot, the editing part, getting it down, it's tedious, but it's like boom, 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 boom. I can do that. I don't know how, I've never measured how fast, but I can do that pretty quick. It is the video part that can take a long time. If it's something where I'm finding clips right away and I'm like, oh, that's right, I'm scrubbing and I'm like, yep, I got that visual, great. But like I'm working on one right now. This is what I do. I go out once I had the clip. Is that it? Yeah. Once I had the clip like noted out, I went and found all the spots like on Adobe Premiere on the file where there's visuals, and I mark that like where that's going to be, and then I write them down. And so like this clip is, I think this one's 28 seconds flat, and this one's going to have like 22 or 23 cuts. Right. So they move, and it's on like different things that he says. So he's got a line where he goes, the Iron Dome is a technology that Israelis have that intercepts bombs in the air. And he says it just like that. And so that's going to be the Iron Dome, cut, is a technology, cut, the Israelis have, cut, that, while he's like holding to that, cut, intercepts bombs, cut, in the air, cut. And this is going to be like boom, 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 right? And so you can imagine what types of things I'd use. But especially when there's not something that is someone's face directly in the camera, anything, those cuts, it's very hard to explain. I'd almost have to have you sit here with me. They need to do something. Like there's coloring, movement, obviously HD. I use everything with very few exceptions. I use everything that's has to be 1080p for those cuts. 4K is great too. But it's got to have something that catches your eye, like, whoa, think of it this way. Think of the people who make movie trailers. I make a movie trailer. I make 30-second movie trailers for a living. That's what I tell people. I record podcasts and make 30-second movie trailers. So like all those things that make you go, oh my God. And you're looking at a trailer for Gigli and you think it's going to be the best movie ever, but really it's the shittiest movie of all time. Someone's trailer made you think that like, Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck were going to have this amazing movie because they cut together all these little scenes and now bang, there it is. Not that I'm not doing that. Like I'd like to think the podcasts are great, but that's the power of being able to create something that's short and like makes you go, whoa.
And so with doing movie trailers, that obviously, like we talked about, takes you a lot of time. And I feel the common advice I hear all the time is just post as much as you can. Volume, quantity will lead to quality. But you're doing the opposite. you're posting less often, but higher quality. And so I'm curious, is that something you want to get better? Like maybe it's having a team so you can be posting more trailers throughout a week, or do you want to leave it? Do you like it where it's just every once in a while, but I know when a clip drops, like this is a quality clip?
The answer is it's a middle ground. I would like to be posting more than I am right now. The last month and a half, there have been a lot of things going on. Like I do everything at the moment still. I need to get to a point where that's not the case, but that's why I don't really sleep and this is just what I do, you know? But I want to get it to a point where I can post more consistently. I do know I've now made a bet. YouTube is what changed this. YouTube absolutely. There was not this luxury on TikTok because on TikTok, it's so exact. They liked certain hashtags. So we talk about everything in this show. I could have a bomb ass clip, but if it's not the one that they love me posting right now, they don't care. Right? Like one of my number one clips on YouTube now is one that had my highest watch time and highest completion percentage of all time on TikTok. And it got to 150,000 views on TikTok within 2 hours. The engagement was insane. And it had hashtags that had billions of views, tens of billions of views. So I'm like, oh my God, this is going to the moon, right? They cut it because it was like about sneakers. Nothing like what I had posted ever actually for that one, but in the previous 5 posts, so they stopped it. Then I take it to YouTube, 8.5 million. And 8.5 million on YouTube for my business, for what I do, for conversions to podcast listeners, is like getting 25 million on TikTok. There's no more than that. There's no comparison, right? So, like, there's certainly there. YouTube changed it to that I could go towards quality. But what you don't want to do is then not just post once in a while because you're losing strikes, right? Like these are, or you're losing outs, I should say. These are outs you have. If I could post every day, I would post every day. What I won't do is the Gary V model with that. And with Gary V, I always say this: when he's right, he is fucking right, man. I mean, he's a very smart guy and he knows a lot of shit. He knows a lot of shit I've never even thought about. But there are some things that he got carried away with that I can see across culture. Everyone takes the advice and it's not working. And one of those things is you just got to post every day, man. You got to be posted 3 times a day on TikTok. Horrible, horrible advice. The number one thing on anything, not just TikTok, not just YouTube Shorts, but even like on YouTube, like in general, the number one metric that does tie all these platforms together is watch time. What is your average watch time? An average watch time is directly correlated to entertainment. There is a fine balance between people not seeing you enough and people seeing you too much. If you are just posting shit on there, you become a total commodity. And eventually what they do after a week, they start skipping you. I do it all the time with people. There's people I can't even find now who might have decent content, but they post all the fucking time. I'm like, I can't. And so what happens when that happens? Not only do you lose watch time, you lose viewers, you hurt yourself in the algorithm, and now you have a hole to dig out of. And so, yeah, you could keep amassing followers. There's people who just keep adding people who are aware of them. That's okay. That's not a quality model, though. You know, how many people are going to be blown away with you when they're not seeing you somewhat often because they've decided that there's too much of you, and so now they never see you at all? You know, so the answer is not to be like, yo, I'm going to post just once a week. I don't want to make it perfect. Don't do that. I did post. I was trying to post at one point close to every day. I was never quite there. That was too hard. That was a lot. Even when my clips were no video cuts and way easier to make and I wasn't as good at them. And so there were a lot of things wrong with them. Like that was not, there's other things going on. I got to edit episodes. I take care of everything here. Right. So I think the best I ever did was 6 days in a week early on. Then it got to a point where I'm like, all right, it's 4 or 5. And then it got to a point where I'm like, all right, it's like if I could get to 3 at 4 would be unreal. I think I could still do that 3 at the level I'm at now. But if there's other things going on, as there have been, and it's been good stuff over the past month and a half related to the podcast, yeah, there's going to be a little sacrifice with that. And it's also a lot of creativity. Like it's just like, it's stressful to think about. And so I think some of it is me also hitting my own wall with that a little bit. I haven't taken like any days off since I started this thing 2020. So part of it's like I have to give myself a little bit of understanding, but now I am thinking like, hey, I'm putting out quality stuff, but I've been doing 1 to 2 a week. 1 week I fired off 3 in 2022. That's got to be better. I gotta have 2 a week. Like if they're going to be high quality productions, there's no reason I can't do that. Right. And if I could get to 3, let's get to 3, gamified a little bit. So I'm going to get a little better with that because now I think I'm not that I focus too much on quality, but now I'm lacking on the quantity just in recent weeks a little bit, but what I'm not going to do is suddenly be like, oh, now I have a lot of attention. I'm just going to start sending clips. Horrible idea, man. Every single clip, the way I treat it is when someone follows me, I am at 100. I cannot go up. I can only go down. And the minute I lose a point, gaining that point back is 6 times as hard as losing it. So if I post 3 videos in a row that aren't bangers, and I know someone who was looking through all my content, who gets all my videos and is a newer follower, now has seen 3 in a row where they were like, maybe they watched a lot of it on reputation, but they haven't gotten that feeling out of it. They're not like, whoa. Now I'm like, yo, I'm at like a 95 or a 90 with them. I assume maybe I'm at like an 80. I'm like, this next one's got to be like, oh, there he is, right? It needs to be like out of the park. They're on my page clicking podcasts, because they want to. And they're like, fuck. That is very much my approach.
I'm glad you brought up Gary Vee because that's kind of where I was taking, but I never know how much people pay attention to him. Because the other thing that he often says is quality is subjective. So I'm curious what does, like, you laugh at that. So I'm curious kind of your rebuttal to that and like what quality means to you.
The quote itself is 1,000% correct. But the way he says it, the intonation is where I would have a good argument with him because he's saying, he's like this, in my opinion, and I may be putting words in his mouth, so I'd let him correct it if this is wrong, but he is disqualifying quality in favor of quantity. He's trying to say because it's subjective, there's really no such thing as quality, so you just got to fucking throw shit out there. And he may not be going that far. He is a very smart guy. I don't think I think he does look through his feeds and see kids who are clearly following his model and go, what the fuck, sometimes. Like, he definitely does. But while it's subjective, there's a reason Marty Scorsese's Marty Scorsese. Did he out-subjective everyone? Yeah, he did. Right? He out-subjected fucking everyone because they watched it and they're like, well, that's a banger. Never seen that before. Creativity is whatever comes up in your mind, in your brain, as you throw one thing together. Okay, like Jimi Hendrix. Did he out-subjective all the other guitarists? Fuck yeah, he did. Guy played the guitar with his teeth. Right? Was he sitting there worried about quantity and because quality doesn't matter? No. Look at everyone behind me. Every single person on my wall. Are they worried about quantity and because quality doesn't matter? Steve Jobs' dad taught him when he was a kid. His dad was a carpenter. I've told this story on my podcast before, but I'll die on this hill. His dad one time was fixing the back of a cabinet that was going to be against the wall or a dresser. And he was like, he was focused on one part. He pulled it away and was fixing up and sanding it. And Steve was a little kid. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? He's like, oh, this part is a little bit off kilter with that part over there. And Steve's like, but Dad, that's, first of all, I couldn't tell at all. He was looking at it. There's no difference to my eye. And secondly, it's against the wall. It's the part no one sees. Who cares? And his dad goes, but if you know it's wrong, you know it's wrong. And so something about it is now fucked up. He didn't say it like that. The kid was 5, but that was the message of it. And so when Steve Jobs built the iPhone, everything he did, the iMac and all that, he and Johnny Ive, who was the chief design officer of Apple, probably, in my opinion, the greatest industrial designer of all time, they would sit alone in the studio at Apple in silence and just pass products to each other and like make like noises, like not on purpose. They would just like, they were on that type of wavelength, and they focused on everything down to the internal components, which drove their engineers nuts, because engineers do not think like this at all. They're like, does it work or doesn't it? Right. But they would sit there and like the iMac, for example, one of the things they came up with was it would have a transparent interface. So when you looked at the actual, because it was a computer, when you looked at the computer, you could see into it. So they didn't just want the hard drive being all wired wherever. They wanted it looking like the Mona Lisa in there. Every little detail matters. So when I look at the history of people who have done, look, Tesla, Elon's on there. You don't think Elon cares about the perfect design of those Tesla cars? You ever hear him talk about that shit? So when I look at everyone who's done anything great in society, I could look at athletes. Kobe Bryant. You don't think he cared about the quality of where his elbow was when he was taking a turnaround jumper from the point? Gary Vee is wrong on that, straight up. Now, if I am putting some words in his mouth, and he could at least say it matters, it's just don't use that as an excuse to not post. Now I'll flip it around and say 1,000% agree with you, Gary, because it's not like just like Kobe's taking one jumper in a game, he can't always find the perfect spot. When you're putting out marketing content, you're putting that shit out all the time, like you're going, right? So you're not making an Oscar winner every time. I try to think like I do, but like it's not a reality. So it's funny, that quote actually does, he talks about subjectivity. That quote is very subjective, because I will either shut him down like I did if he went all the way one way, or I will say he's absolutely right on the back end there. So I can't say for sure, but when I've heard him say it a couple different times, my takeaway was that he either accidentally or on purpose implied something, at least to the average person listening, that was like, no, just put out a ton. That's a bad idea. You will lose.
Obviously you can get better if you're just focusing on quality, or that middle ground of posting as best as you can, as often as you can. But some people argue that if you post a lot, you're going to get better, and it increases your rate of getting better because you're posting so much more often. You're doing it more often. So how do you ensure you're still improving at a solid rate if you're not posting as frequently?
Absolutely. I agree with, and that's why you can't, it's a balance. You can't just post and that's why I'm saying like this year, I haven't posted enough. That's not good. Like straight up. You don't want to get to a point where it's like, I just do this once in a while because I make it perfect. That is not it. It is another example, the 0 to 100. People got to find that 50. Everyone's trying to be going 1 mile an hour, or they're trying to go 100, and they're both going to end badly. One, the car is going to run out of gas before you get there. The other one is going to run off a cliff because you're going too fast. So you have to be able to put out to be able to test, but also over time, it's just natural. As your quality improves, your quantity will go down. That is true. You just don't want it to go through the floor. That's what I focus on. I'm like, don't go through the floor. Like we're not anywhere near the floor right now, but I'm like, we're way too close to it for my liking. So now we're going to go up a little bit, and we're going to put some more out. Like after next week, like that's going to be a prime focus. So it's a day-to-day thing. You can very quickly get into patterns. So when you see that, as I've seen mine, I'm like, okay, well now we're going to take some actions to set up to break that pattern. So let's do that. It is a battle day to day, period.
You're talking about the wall there behind you, and I'm very curious. Maybe it's not on that wall, but where is your YouTube plaque going to go?
Someone asked me that the other day. Probably not in sight. I'm excited to get it. That's really cool. But like I don't know where it would fit in here. I don't. I use the wall for people that aren't me. People already got to see me when they turn it on. They don't need to see me on a plaque on the wall saying I got subscribers. But it is a cool, like, for me it was a cool thing because it's like, well, we're not on zero anymore. That's kind of cool. So I'm looking forward to it. But I'll probably just keep that like for myself somewhere.
Does the day March 31st, 2021 mean anything to you?
March 31st, 2021. Yes. Yeah. I know what you're going to say.
You started a tweet thread.
I did. Yeah.
You're just tweeting out numbers with no context. Is that your subscriber count?
Yeah. So Twitter is the one place that it's the one social media I don't advertise. I keep it private. Like it's public. Anyone can find it, but I don't talk about here's my handle or like go there or whatever. So it's like kind of my own little spot with a few people I know. In fact, a lot of people I know like literally aren't on Twitter themselves. Like they go on there for news, but they don't even have an account. But yeah, I think that was, I don't really know what that was, but I had been at it for about 6 months and I had people say, wow, this has a lot of potential, but like it wasn't anywhere near there. The shit takes a while. And I was like, well, what's a good way? I have all these files and shit. I'm like, what's a good way, just simple for me to keep track? I'm like, maybe I'll just start my own little thread. No one's even going to know what it is. I don't think it's fucking Morse code, so who cares? And I post it once a week, like early in the morning of Wednesday morning, like 1 or 2 a.m., usually something like that. And it's just wherever my sub count stands. And so it started on March 31st at 294. And now it's, I guess, like mid-February, and we're at like 115 or 116, something like that, 116,000. So, that's less than a year. And it also, if you want to plot it on a chart, I haven't done that, but you can see what a content chart looks like. It does not happen overnight. And then it starts to go. And it has lulls too. You can go see the lulls in there. It's just that's the nature of it. But yeah, that was more for me than anything. And as it's gone along, I've kind of looked at it like, wow, it is pretty cool that there's like it's like a public, it's not on the blockchain, but it's on a public blockchain record, where you can kind of see how this went. I really didn't think anything of it at the time. And then as the weeks went on and then like some people would ask me about it, it got a little bit funny. There's like 10 of my guys know about it, like that are on Twitter who actually know me. No one else even knows about this except you. So I guess now a few people listening, but yeah, that was just a way to keep track, almost like a little bit of accountability, I guess.
And so how often do you look back on? I know it's not been too long for you. It's only been 2 years. And I usually ask this question for people who've been doing it for like 5-10, but for you, like 2 years is still a significant period of time. So how often are you looking back on the journey so far?
No, I don't have a ton of time to look back. I have a moment here and there when I'm doing something relevant that makes me have to put things together. And it kind of freaks me out when I do because I'm like, holy fuck, there's a lot of weird things coming together here. Or, wow, that had to happen. And then, oh, that had to happen too. Oh, I had to figure that out. Oh my God, what if I never, you can get in your head doing that. But it has been a long 2 years because, like I said, I've been in here since late March 2020, or April 1st, 2020 really is when I went under, right? And then I launched September 15th, 2020. But that 5-6 months leading up to it, it was the same shit, just not putting out public stuff. I was just working around the clock and building it. And so it's weird to look back because it has been, in a lot of ways, it's flown by, but it's also been an eternity because I have a ton of respect for people that build content platforms, a ton of respect. And I did before I did this. A lot of respect. I would never tolerate people talking shit on people that I knew what kind of, especially once I started doing some media work, I knew what kind of work went into that. But I don't know how many people undertook something where they didn't think at all about the level of stuff that was going to go into it and ended up just having to consume every single second of every day and not do anything else. Like, there are people out there like that, but it's fewer. And I accidentally did that. What I'll say is that with the context of time and looking back, I know, and I knew this at the start, it's not sustainable. I was like, you probably do this for like 3 years like this. And that's probably where it's going to come in, right? That's the way my timeline's working. That's probably going to be legit. And then you're going to need to have a team and get some help and offshoot some things. And also then scale more too. So like, I look at that and I'm like, well, some of these other people I admired over the years who did end up having to do it like that. And there are examples. I'm like, well, now I understand. And now I can say, like, I'm doing that like them. That's really, really cool. And so that's like a fun part of it. But, you know, it's almost like I waited to make moves and do things. I always, you know, it's almost like you spend your life like, oh, tomorrow. Oh, you'll do it tomorrow. Oh, yeah, you'll figure it out tomorrow. Oh, no, it'll be there. But you get to a point where you're like, yo, bro, you either do this shit or you're going to die. Not really, but that's the way you got to think about it. And that's what happened. I was just like, I got to do this or I'm going to die. And so if you told me like, hey, I mean, I always worked very hard and I spent a lot of time working, right? But I knew how to blow off steam and I had a very good life. I would say from the end of high school until right up to doing this, with a couple 6-month exceptions in there. God damn, I had a fun life. So now I traded that in for 2-3 years and I don't really have one. And I'm like, well, you spent whatever it was, like 8 years having a great fucking time. You're gonna have a great fucking time on the other side of this too, while you're doing something you love and you're financially free. This is your time to this is your self-imposed little prison sentence, right? Like, that's just what it is. When you are building something, it's a morbid way to look at it, and it's not. Don't take me out of context there. But when you are an entrepreneur building a company, you're a podcaster building a podcast, when you are building something yourself from scratch, you know, you are married to that. You're chained to that desk for a set period of time. It is what it is. Like I said at the beginning of this whole ramble, there are content creators who were able to grow into it over time. That would have been nice. Where those people deserve a ton of credit, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, is that they figured it out. They figured out that they should start doing it at a very optimal time, where they had time on their side in their own financial life. They had some of that on their side. Maybe they were even younger. You know, like Mr. Beast, when did he start recording? When he was like 14?
Yeah.
13. Yeah. Right. So Mr. Beast kind of like grew into it. Brilliant. Right. Like, that's the most perfect example, because he literally started when he was 13. Like, I didn't have that luxury. It was like, Jules, you have to make it or you're done. You know, like, you're going to be at a job you hate, working, doing something you hate, and wondering about all those times where you said, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or, oh, I'll try that sometime, but never did. This is it. Like, you have to do it now.
Is that pressure? Is there any drawbacks to that pressure? Because obviously the positives are it's gotten you to where you are. It's helped you grow. But are there drawbacks to it as well?
Normal drawbacks. You know, you give up your life. That's a drawback. I don't know about you. I like having fun. You know, there's less of that. I find fun in other things, though. Surrounded by this, I look at the green grass, put it that way. But yeah, there's little drawbacks, but it's like, there's nothing in life that doesn't have a drawback to it. There's nothing in life that doesn't, like, that pressure of it, that, you know, like my boss used to say, and I'm sure a lot of people have said this before him, but always had an effect on me when he would say it. He's like, oh my God, now I just blanked out on the line. I had it in my head, but he's like nothing worth doing is easy. And then, the same one everyone says, he'd follow it up with, if it was easy, everyone would do it. Nothing worth doing is easy. And he told me that the day I went and met with him, because I was leaving the job officially to launch this. And he was like, hey, I don't know a lot about this shit, but you seem like you're really good at it. It's going to be hard, but you stay with this, like something great may happen. That's just how it is. Like the cream rises to the top, but it doesn't rise to the top on day one. I mean, the number of people you see go viral, you didn't see the years they spent before that to get to that moment. There are people who go viral one day, right? Like the Island Boys went viral one day. They'll be gone. It's just, I don't wish that upon them. Wish them all the best, but like, there is a blind squirrel finding a nut once in a while, but you have to remember that that's one person. How many of those are there a year? 3, in something like that. Just does. You can't, it's like winning the lottery. You can't expect that to happen. It will be like, back to the Mr. Beast example. I think he had 1,000 subscribers for like 4 years or something, right? Like now he's got 100 and some million or whatever it is, like, that did not happen in 2 minutes. That guy, I respect the fuck out of that guy. That guy built, and you want, by the way, if people want a masterclass on how to keep attention, holy shit. And that is all he thinks about. And he's the best at it.
I really like that you clarified that what you're doing is something worth doing and it's what you are supposed to be doing, but that doesn't mean it's easy, because I feel like people have it misconstrued right now where everyone's told to go find their passion and they expect their passion to be easy, that it's something they're meant to do, and so therefore it shouldn't be challenging to them. But there's nothing, to your point, it wouldn't be worth doing then if it were easy, but people have the expectation that it will be because it's their passion.
Yeah, and that's, you can look at, on the broad scale in culture, you can look at the athletes as one example, and you can see guys what makes them different. I talked about Kobe a little bit ago, but another prime example there. Kobe was a great athlete, don't get me wrong. He was special. But I would argue he was never a top 15 athlete in the NBA at any point in his career. I mean, these are literally the best athletes in the world in the NBA. All right. So he's still cream of the crop, but in the context of the league, he was never a top 15 athlete. My God, like the athleticism of Tracy McGrady and then LeBron James is no comparison. Even like him with Jordan, no comparison. I think Kobe had a 40-inch vertical, which is crazy, but there's guys who have 48. He wasn't built like the statue of David. There's other guys who are, but he worked. And so he absolutely mopped the floor with other guys who had more talent than him, because he matched the talent with the pressure of work and building his craft and getting better and better and better. And you see guys like that. And then you see, people like Ben Simmons, who was born to play basketball. He was godly in some of his natural talents and also his physical stature for what he can do. But he's a lazy son of a bitch, and he doesn't care about anyone but himself. And so he doesn't work on anything. And so the one thing you need in the NBA today, if you're going to be someone who is not a back to the basket big, which there aren't that many, is you have to be able to shoot a little bit. He can't shoot. He can't hit the broadside of a barn, and he doesn't work on it. He acts like he works on it, but he doesn't. He takes pictures with Instagram models. I guess he's getting married now, but that'll probably last like a year. And, he takes pictures of his cars and shit. And then, he just likes being a star, but that got him nowhere. And he's actually a pariah at this point. That is sad to me. When I see that, Ben Simmons should go down as one of the greatest players to ever pick up a basketball. There's no excuse that he shouldn't. But he's, unless something drastic changes here, he's not gonna, because he does it. He's just relying. He's just coasting on some natural talent. Doesn't work.
I know we're over time here. I know you're a very busy individual, so I don't want to take up any more time than I have over what I told you I would be taking up. So I'm going to jump to my last question. We'll probably have to get you back on the show in a few months here because I think we touched on like 15% of my notes here that I had that I wanted to ask you about. But I'll jump to my last question that I ask everybody at the end of every interview. And I like to flip the script a little bit with this question. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. Pretend you have a crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question, you'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
In life?
Yeah.
And like in general?
Anything.
What happens when you die?
It's a good one. It's a safe one.
I think that's actually somewhat easy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I'd love to know. Because I think in that answer would hold also the answer to the meaning of life.
How so?
That is pretty impossible to put into words. I would do a bad job if I tried, but I feel like a lot of people in their own way could understand what I mean by that, because the one part I could say is that you live with the understanding that when you're born, you're always 1 second, millisecond, whatever, closer to dying. And when you die, you don't know what comes next. And so if you're living your whole life to die, what is the point based on what happens when that actually does? I think that's probably the central understanding. Like there's plenty of things that go into the meaning of life for sure, way beyond that. But I'm saying, like, if you wanted to get to the crux middle of the meaning of life itself, I don't know if there's a bigger thing, because that would give you the answers to everything else. Like what's going on out there, like all these other things.
Fair enough, man. It's a deep way to end on this podcast, but
yeah, good question.
But thank you. But I want to give you the floor now. Where can the people find you? Where can they find Trendifier? I know we've mentioned it throughout, but I want you to plug anything and everything you got right now.
Awesome. Thank you. So you can the full name is Trendifier with Julian Dorey, which is my name. And you can get it on Apple or Spotify. It's Trendifier. And you can also get it on YouTube. The channel there is just called Trendifier. And I am on TikTok still. On Instagram as well. I post there a little bit. That's just at my name, Julian D. Dorey, Dorey, last name. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome, man. Well, make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so people can find it. I want to thank you once again for taking time to come on the podcast. I want to thank everybody.
You, man.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Anytime. Like I said, we'll have to run it back at some point. But I also want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Do me a big favor, go and subscribe to Trendifier. I was not joking or lying when I said it is in my current rotation. Every single time it comes out, I'm downloading it. I think you should as well. Like I said, I'll make sure it's linked in the show notes down below so you can find it. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me everywhere on social media at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by Surf. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon. Awesome, man. I'm just going to stop the recording here. It's just